Okay, so we are doing a 2-year British Academy funded project, and effectively we have access, so we kind of partnered informally with the BBC, and we have access to 165,000 radio news scripts. So they've recently digitised them. So they've set up a website that we have to log into, but we have access to what was originally Home Service, which you now know as Radio 4. So we have access to all of their radio news scripts. We're very specifically looking to explore how they've reported on Black and Black Britishness, in particular migration and experiences, sort of post-World War II to the early 90s. We say early 90s, well, so no, it says to mid-90s, but realistically from sort of 91, their system moves over, so you kind of have 1990 and then anything past that is a new system. And a large part of our research is sort of about public intellect and community engagement. So we're inviting different generations of the public from African and Caribbean backgrounds to come and speak back to the BBC's reporting, something that we like to call talk back or clap back. So they're able to talk, to look at what the scripts have said. We're very big on intergenerational because let's say if we've got someone's grandma who's maybe in her 70s or 80s who has lived through that time, looking at how it's being reported versus what she lived through. So we're really interested in that. And for us, it's really important that we facilitate knowledge exchange. So we're going to be doing 2 core outputs. One is going to be a website, so it'll be used as a digital resource, hoping that schools, academics, community activists, everybody can access it and use it as an educational resource. And then we're also going to do some podcasts that allow everyone to engage with it, and those who were not, let's say they're not our immediate stakeholders, so weren't at our meetings or have been privy to the news script straight away, they can still listen back on podcasts to access what we've been doing for the last 2 years.
Thanks, Sylvie. So, as Sylvie explained, the collection consists of thousands of radio news scripts. Thank you. So they represent a portion of this vast BBC News output, and they also kind of remind us of the segmentation that characterizes broadcasting and, of course, broadcast archives. I would also argue that the news archives epitomize, really, that segmentation, as the bulletins were inserted into the schedule several times, repeated at various times during the day and evening. In our research, these segments also become fragments of our knowledge of the BBC News current affairs discourse, as we are very fully aware that there were several other current affairs programs at the time, Today, The World at One, Analysis, The World Tonight, and those complemented BBC's factual news output and ran parallel to the news bulletins. This is important to consider as we need to remind ourselves of the conclusions we come to in our research are based only on one section, one fragment of this news output, which is part of the larger flow of BBC News.
Cool. So in terms of digitisation, we've got some research opportunities and challenges. So one of the great opportunities is that data that maybe is not readily seen has now, hopefully will become more easily searchable. Hence, we talk about our website, so as an educational resource. So it could be something in history that you weren't aware of, or sometimes I research things and the information is very, very scarce. So we hopefully will provide a tool where people can actually get more information about a specific event.
So another aspect it's been sort of interesting for us in terms of the methodology is that this digital collection facilitates the study of broadcasting history at a macro level. And in our project, one of the key objectives is to explore precisely that, the evolution of the language of race, various patterns, motifs, approaches across the post-war period. Access to this large database also allows us to see where research findings are quite dense, for example, where we have lots of news coverage on certain topics, and where our findings are thin, or even where our searches yield nothing. These are the gaps, or what we call the radio silences in our project, which they can be as revealing, or even more revealing sometimes than the cases where there's lots of news coverage. Now, the myth of a complete collection what I'm referring to here, of course, is not about our understanding of, say, analog archives. Most of us are fully aware how fragmentary archives are. We would like, though, here to, Sylvia, to ask and explore the extent to which this question of how fragmentary archives are is sidelined or even forgotten once researchers are given access to digitized archival collections and databases. Physically visiting an archive, going through archival materials, usually involves a process that goes from expected or unexpected discovery to frustration at not being able to access or find what you want, particularly when it comes to broadcast archives, where a lot of early material does not survive. This gives researchers an understanding of where the archive begins and where it ends, where its physical and material borders lie. With a digitized collection, we found that these borders become porous, almost invisible, as the search tools we're offered operate on unifying principles that can easily bring together different data. The searches we do may not always be successful, but we easily change the search terms and move on from there without giving further thought to what we cannot find. The database is generous enough to move us along to our next search and our next find, and no more questions asked. We do ask questions, but you can come back to that.
Cool. On the back of no more questions asked, one of the things that does bring us right back to the present is that at times we may move past it, but when we have stakeholder meetings, you'll have someone from the community that comes in and they ask us about a particular event, particularly people in regions. One of our stakeholders kept mentioning, I think, mining in Leicester, and we would search and there was absolutely nothing. And let's say for us, it's like, oh, okay, we move on. But for her, it's like, hold on a minute, why is that not there? So what does that mean to some people, not being able to have that history in the archive? Digitization, we want to talk about public. So when we initially started this project, it came up, I think, whoever they mentioned it in the Q&A, we were told the plan was that the 165,000 digitized news scripts were going to become public. Every member of public was going to be able to access it, which for me was one of the main things why I even wanted to be part of the project, because public intellect is really, really important, that it's not just academics to access it. It could be somebody who doesn't have internet at home but goes to the local library. So that was really, really important. We have since been told that actually they're going to be doing commercial licenses. So again, behind the paywall, you have to be privileged enough to be able to afford it and to access these news scripts that belong to a public corporation. So that's something. And also, what does that mean in terms of, well, as we said, our research, public engagement? Yes, you can access our website, but we're also limited on what we can put up there. So if you wanted to know more, what we believed was going to be public is potentially now not going to be.
I don't know if there's anyone from the BBC here. I know, Jake, we are working with some members of the BBC archive team. Some of you probably know them. Jake Berger. He was, I think he's not here. Anyway, to defend himself. But in terms of, there are other things that are quite central to this project and to what we would like to do. And it's about collaboration and public engagement, as Sylvie said. So this BBC News collection offers two things which are very critical to the project's key focus on the decolonizing the archive. These two things are, first of all, that there is lots and lots of archival material and data, as you can imagine. And secondly is that, there's easy access, easy digital access. These two aspects then lend themselves perfectly to collaboration and partnership building. And these are critical if we are to bring different voices and perspectives to write and record a different kind, I dare say, radical history of the BBC from the bottom up. And the digitized segments of news bulletins can be easily passed on, in the format we have them. They can be passed on to be read and debated with participants in the project, wherever they are, at a community centre in Newham, London, in the comfort of a participant's home, or at a school in Liverpool. The material is rich too, because the amount of data is vast, offering us various entries into historical themes, periods, and questions, and allowing us to engage a range of audiences, intergenerational audiences, with different experiences, interests, and perspectives. And finally, the digitized archive and its outputs can be more easily brought into dialogue with other digitized archival collections in the form of linked data. And this is what we are hoping to do once the project digital resource is ready. We aim to link our work, at first a bit more simply, but we aim to link our work with similar databases, digital projects, and archives to help build a multifaceted, dialogic, and collaborative approach to accessing and using broadcast and media archives.
I will wrap up with sensitive data. So when we talk about sensitive data and ethics of care, there's so many layers to it. First things first, we're looking into how the reporting is of Black and Black British migration. The obvious, I'm a Black British female. So in terms of sensitive data, I'm at times having to look at reporting that is wildly offensive, but also makes you reflect on yourself and your space, your place in society now. So that requires a lot of sort of reflexivity and discussions. On the other end of that, it's also interesting. So a lot of our stakeholders, we talk about different communities around the UK. A lot of them are, maybe they are small businesses or they do projects by themselves. A lot of them are sort of Black people, Asian, let's say BAME communities for the sake of this. But we have to also think about their input and their thoughts. So for example, there was a politician that kept coming up with some of our reportage. When we spoke about how we were going to link that onto our online website, they spoke really, really passionately about not wanting to include them. Because their part was, if this is about this specific community, why are we giving light to this racist person? But it's like, it's sensitive data. On one hand, it's a fact, it's part of history, this is what's happened. So where's the line of sort of ethical care? What can we include and what do you not want to include to also safeguard certain communities?
Yeah, I think I will leave it there because it's the last session after a long day. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing we were thinking when we kind of were thinking about the public engagement aspect of this project, but also in terms of how we deal with it. So the first thing is that this project has kind of already established relationships with various groups, communities, individuals, and I think this is important. Is to build that relationship. So when we put the call out for anyone to participate in the podcast, this call won't come out of the blue. So that's one thing. Secondly, we kind of have gone through a process of reflection through workshops and feedback sessions we've had with groups and individuals and various outreach events we have sort of done. And that's also important too. So we have opened up that dialogue already, and so people are aware. They know what the project is about. So, but also we have in place, a kind of a system. I mean, like all projects, research projects, there is a kind of various forms people will fill in, and we'll explain to them the context. And for us, we come to this with different perspectives and different experiences, and it is a process of, I think we kind of discuss a lot of, that with colleagues, with me and Sylvie, and it is a process of, somebody said, I think Michael was, when he presented, those conversations are important, they are they're quite revealing, they can be very helpful and supportive. So...
I think one of the first things is we don't shy away from having these discussions. I think that's really important. As Eleni said, we speak every week, and I'm very unapologetic, and sometimes I'm full of rage. And I think it's okay to explore the full spectrum of what your emotions are, because, like you said, we come through it from different spaces, but with me, I mean, I'm also doing a PhD, which is sort of related to this anyway. So it's being able to reflect and actually understand how you feel, why you feel at that time. So I write stuff down. We're very reflexive. In terms of, so I think, which probably a bit more than Eleni, just from lived experience, I filter through. So Eleni will put up scripts, and then we had a large discussion, what script's going to make it into the final. A large part, which I probably hadn't even said to you, but it's just a natural thing, is I'm filtering through, okay, what is too much to put out? So there's a degree of this is important, putting this in is important, and people will want to clap back and there'll be a voice. But then again, what is too much trauma and what actually needs to stay here? So there's that. But also providing that podcast is something where people can clap back. There's nothing worse than reading something and feeling like you're a victim because it goes nowhere. People are able to be part of this podcast, and we're not policing the way that they speak either. So they might come in and say, actually, like, this is BS, and they're able to clap back. And as long as they're articulating why they're annoyed about this script, they're able to include that in a podcast. So I think that gives someone the ownership and power back. So we very much got them to explain to us what the story was, because I think that's one thing. Someone saying something and just going, well, it's not there and moving on. So we gave them the space to tell us what the story was. And on the back of that, Eleni mentioned having a category called radio silence. And that whole part of it is things that happened and were important to people in the community that actually didn't feature in the news at all. I know one thing for me from like sort of the African diaspora, something happened in Congo to Patrice Lumumba. He was killed, but like it didn't come up in the scripts at all. And I remember being like completely flabbergasted. I was like, what? This was like a big man, an important part of like Africa. And I had to sit and like process it, and it will potentially be something that comes into it. And that's where the podcast or even just the paragraph is really great. So it could be that particular person tells us from her point of history what she knows about that and what she would want featured, because that becomes part of the archive in 20 years. It's archive for someone. So oral history will naturally be a big part. Typically, Black people, historically, oral history is how our proverbs, our grandmother stories all get passed down. So we're going to keep that going, but then the website allows it to actually be housed somewhere. In terms of community engagement, Eleni had done a lot of outreach. So by trade, I'm also a radio producer. A radio/podcast producer. So I do a lot of work grassroots and in the communities. So I had a lot of links, in London, because I'm born and raised in London, but also in the regions like Liverpool, where notoriously the reportage is very, very low, or it's toxic riots, and then Liverpool doesn't exist. So I have a lot of relations in that, and we're tapping into those and making sure that they are part of it. The news scripts naturally will be the prompts because they're talking back to the news scripts. But I think there's also space for people to talk about other things. And just like one of the community stakeholders did, it could be something that, we at this point, we have selected what our news scripts are going to be. But if it's something so moving that we actually need to go back to the news scripts and look and say, actually, did this feature somewhere? I think that's something that we definitely could be open to doing.
There's one final stage in this process which we haven't actually overcome. It's like the BBC. The BBC has allowed us to use the scripts for the project, but they are going, the ones we've selected that will go back to the community to be read, and then the participants will respond to them. Those selected scripts, they go through another process of approval right now, as we speak. So they might say, for some reason, oh no, we don't want this script to go out. I don't know, but so there's another thing that we have to consider. But yeah, as Sylvie said, they will really respond to the script. It's free flow.